This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Morgan. I'm an editor at Ahval News, and this is Turkey Abroad. Joining me now is Dr. Kamran Bokhari. He is the Director of Analytical Development at the Newlines Institute for Strategy and Policy in Washington, D.C. Kamran, thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Nick.
I want to ask you today a few questions about Afghanistan, and particularly how events that have gone on since the fall of Kabul are affecting Turkey, and maybe how Turkey may be approaching the country in the future. And the first question that really comes to mind actually has to deal with the airport security proposal that began making the rounds sometime through May and June. And we've had a few mixed reports on it. We had some Turkish media outlets reporting that in the aftermath of the Taliban entering Kabul, that the airport proposal was dead. But now we're starting to see more conversations again that there may be something still on the table. But I want to ask you, in your view, where do you think it is? Do you think this mission that Turkey's proposed to take up in Kabul is dead or alive?
I think it's, I wouldn't call it dead. I make it a habit of never saying never. There's always a possibility. But in this case, one has to understand that this proposal, predates the stunning speed at which the Afghan state collapsed. So when Turkey actually offered this, the Taliban were in a different space. The Afghan state was in a different space. The U.S. was also thinking differently. So what you had was the Taliban denying it or rejecting the offer because they saw Turkey as part of some sort of a U.S. move to control the airport. And so it was natural for the Taliban to say, no, we don't want this and we don't need your help. Thank you very much. But I think that even at the time, the Turks were thinking that how can we be useful to the Americans? The Americans are leaving and, this could put us into a more sort of better relationship with Washington. And it gives us an opportunity to project influence in a country and in an area that is important for Turkey, but Ankara has never played in this area beyond sort of like, low-level contacts. Probably the biggest thing that Turkey was doing in years past is have that relationship with Abdurrashid Dostum, the Uzbek warlord. He apparently has a place to live in Ankara and has been, close with the Turkish state. There were also some Taliban leaders, like former finance minister from the old regime, from Emirate 1.0, Aghajan Motasim, who also moved from Dubai to Istanbul, I think it was like in 6-7 years ago. So beyond that, the Turks really didn't have any skin, in the game. And so this was their way of doing it. And so the Taliban at the time was seeing this sort of like suspiciously, that what does Turkey want? Are they acting as Turkey, or are they, playing a role as a NATO member state? And what's in it, for Turkey? So I think that thing is in the past now. The way that the Afghan state essentially vanished created a new reality where the Taliban cannot afford to say no to these kind of things because now they need all the international assistance that they can get and they need recognition. And so far, no country recognizes them. They hope that Turkey will be amongst the first, along with Pakistan and Qatar and perhaps even the Chinese. But it's still too early to say. So that's now the motivation for the Taliban are changing. The Turks also now see a bigger opening. So now they don't just have to say, oh, we'll take care of airport security for you. Now they will play on the Taliban need to say, there are a lot of things we can do for you, but you need to cooperate. So I think that the whole sort of landscape has changed, and both sides are now looking at this well beyond just airport security.
But if it's not airport security, it brings to my mind the question of what the point is from Turkey's end of this mission, because originally it seemed that, as you said, they were trying to create a good impression on the Americans and show that they can still be a reliable and useful NATO partner. And that was before, of course, the country fell to the Taliban. But going back to the way you're describing it too, it sounds like Turkey's also trying to show the Taliban, what else can we offer you? So it sounds like there's almost like two different things that they have in mind there. Without the secure, say if there is no security mission involved, does that mean that any mission that Turkey undertakes in Afghanistan would probably not really deliver the same results that it hoped in regard to its relationship with Washington in that case?
No, I think that there's more that the Turks see themselves doing for Washington now that Washington is no longer there. So it's moved from, as I said, from sort of that one tactical role, securing the airport, to something bigger and more long-term. And the Turks are betting that the US needs all the help it can get from allies and partners in order to manage this place where the United States spent 20 years and invested a whole lot, but it can't be in that country anymore. So I think the Turks are trying to leverage that. I also think that if I were the Turks, I wouldn't be so enthusiastic to, put soldiers there, because this is like a very chaotic battle space. You don't want them in the middle of, ISIS versus Taliban versus, their enemies. That you don't know what's going to happen. So it's more risky. It's politically more risky for the president, Recep Erdogan, because he's doing this to look good. The last thing he wants is to turn this into something where he is seen as having done the wrong thing, and his popularity takes a hit, or his opponents are able to leverage this against him. So I think he's going to be very careful. I think that was sort of one of those things that, okay, hey, this is your immediate need. Somebody needs to secure this airport. We'll do it for you. I think that was one of those things that he said it, but he also sort of understood the risks there. So I think he's relieved that that's not the case anymore. I don't think that the Turks are going to just send, they may send assistance, but I think that they are not going to be responsible for security there. They're going to let the Taliban do that. The Taliban also do not want to be seen as, not taking care of things themselves. So they have an imperative to do it, on their own. They'll welcome assistance. But I think that there's a broader strategic relationship that's in the making from, the Turkish government's point of view. It's trying to be a great power. That's why they're playing in Libya. That's why they're playing in the Eastern Med. That's why they've carved out a significant sphere of influence in the South Caucasus, Azerbaijan, Armenia. Notice that they've started to have conversations with those who've been their traditional opponents in the Arab world, countries like Egypt, UAE, Saudi Arabia. Qatar is their one ally, but these other countries, which are far more larger, have been opponents of the Turks. And I think it was like a few days ago that there was a report, and I don't know if it was confirmed or not, but I did see something in the MSM that Erdogan spoke with the MBZ of UAE via phone. So I think that this is part of that. And then, Turkey wants to be able to access Central Asia in the long run. And there's just only two ways to access Central Asia. One is through the South Caucasus, but then you run into the Caspian Sea, the Iranians are there, the Russians are there, and you get to Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan, but you're limited. Afghanistan represents sort of a launching off point, if you will. They can come in. It is a weaker country. They can develop a sphere of influence in this country. Yes, the Iranians are there, but then there are the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis have decent relations with the Turks. They both need each other for Afghanistan for their respective interests. And there are three countries that border Afghanistan. So if the Turks have influence in Afghanistan, then it makes it easy for them to sort of move at a future point in time when things are perhaps more stable, that the Turks can then venture into Central Asia. So I think that there's a long-term and there's a short-term strategic calculus that the Turks are trying to operationalize.
I think the question of the strategic calculus is something that's really interesting that I'd like to ask you another question on. And that relates to how it's actually being perceived at home in Turkey, because there is a lot of naturally mixed feelings about any further involvement in Afghanistan from President Erdogan's opposition. And even in the midst of these proposals to keep some presence in Afghanistan, or even, of course, on the question of Afghan refugees coming towards Turkey, which I'd also like to ask you about a little further on. But one charge that the opposition is throwing at Erdogan is that they think he's cutting backroom deals with the United States as a means to improve his image there, and also try to play that long game that you're talking about. Do you think it's likely that there is something more that could be going on between Turkey and the U.S. regarding like a common approach to Afghanistan right now, whether it's on continuing a Turkish presence to facilitate some indirect U.S. presence, or even related to refugees?
So there are a number of angles that you've touched on. So let me just address the refugees first and foremost. I think that the refugees is not that big of a deal, and I'll tell you why. Because the immediate, outflow of refugees will go to Iran and Pakistan. If let's say things go south and people start to flee, these are the two immediate neighboring countries. Then there is the border with China, which is like 60 kilometers. And, before you get to the Chinese frontier, you have to go through a mountainous terrain. And it's inhospitable. So that's not an option. Then you have, the Turkmen border, the Uzbek border, and the Tajik border. We're already seeing some outflow from there. But Turkey is far removed. So Turkey will receive refugees in one of two ways. One, if the Iranians sort of open the door and they say, okay, those coming here, you can also go to Turkey, we don't mind. And they just let them go. And that sort of is something that will then, create problems between the Turks and the Iranians. The second option is that if Turkey says, okay, we're willing to take a certain amount of people, like the Canadians have done, like other Europeans have done, like the Americans are doing. I don't see that happening. I think that Turkey has enough in the form of 3 million Syrian refugees. So I don't think that there's an appetite for that. There'll be some symbolic, I'm pretty sure that can get, Erdogan good press. So he'll probably do that. So I don't think it's the refugees is not like a strategic level issue. But I think that what the idea about a backroom deal with the United States, I think that's very likely because U.S.-Turkish relations have not been great. And the Turks are always looking for ways in which they can improve relations with the U.S. The simple reason is that they have to do business with the Americans and the Russians at the same time. Now, if you're Turkey, you can't be at odds with both of them. You can be at odds with one, but and you've seen this behavior. Once they're at odds with the Americans, they wave the S-400 card and their relationships and their photo ops with Putin and everything, and that's to shape American perceptions. But then that's sort of like information operations. The real thing is that at the end of the day, the Turks can't disentangle themselves from America, and they'll always be in the American camp because they've always been. It's very difficult, and your entire weapon systems. One S-400 system is not going to counter the fact that Turkey's entire military hardware platforms are Western. Okay, it's a member of NATO, so there's no escaping the United States. And at a time when the Turks want to push into areas that have been traditionally Russian spheres of influence, like Libya, okay, like Syria, like the Caucasus, and now the Russians aren't, they're not naive to know that the Turks are eyeing Central Asia as well. So they need good relations with the U.S. So how does that happen? The way that it happens is you look at what does the U.S. need. So I think that what the Erdogan people are telling their American counterparts is something along the lines of, how can we help in Afghanistan? We got your back, and we can do this, we can do that. So they're trying to become useful to the Americans. And they know that the Americans need all the help right now because the United States has pulled out. But it doesn't mean that it's sort of saying, okay, we're going to leave Afghanistan to its devices. And they need all the help that they can get. And this is the US strategic doctrine, following the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, something that's been in the making since the days of the Obama administration, which is that the United States shouldn't be doing the heavy lifting anyway. It's just too costly. And we need to in every region, we need to let the regional players, take the lead. The Quad is all about that when it comes to the Indo-Pacific. You see, what they're doing with the Europeans in terms of Ukraine and whatnot. You look at the balance of power that the United States pursues in the Middle East. So I think that here also they're going to let the regional players deal with it. The Iranians will have a role as well. So if the Turks want to play in that, the more the merrier from the American point of view. It becomes their headache, not ours. So I think that's what's happening here.
And what do you think also about what role Turkey can play inside of the political process that's going on in Afghanistan right now? Because President Erdogan, he has had a few mixed things to say about the Taliban in the last few months, where on one hand, he called on them to, quote unquote, end the occupation of their country. And then on the other hand, he says that they have no issue with the Taliban's ideology, that they can speak easier with one another than with imperialists, as he put it, in reference, of course, to the countries working together with the United States. And then on the other hand, the Taliban has described Turkey as a brother country, but they made clear that they don't want any Turkish soldiers to remain in the country. And the other side of it that came to mind is that recently I saw in the Turkish press that one of the Afghans involved in negotiation with the Taliban, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, he described Turkey as the most reliable partner in this process. What do you think about this? How do you think the two sides are viewing Turkey, or how Turkey views either the Taliban, or in this case, someone like Hekmatyar, who's said to have had a relationship with Erdogan in the past?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things here to unpack. Number one, to your reference to those statements that Erdogan made with regards to the Taliban, that end the occupation and we don't have any problems with their ideology. I think he was wooing the Taliban. The Taliban didn't know what's happening, and they're not. Their bandwidth is stretched, or has been stretched. They're dealing with Qatar, dealing with the U.S., dealing with the Pakistanis, dealing with everybody, and also they were trying to topple this government. And so they look at this and A, they don't have much time to sort of process what's going on. B, they're looking at it, as I said, with suspicion. You know, why do you want to come in and do security for the airport? What's in it for you? So when you're not getting a warm response, you do what Erdogan did. You try to woo them, try to sort of play nice and say, hey, you know, we're not here to interfere. We respect what you're doing. We just want to help, you know, sort of lower the temperature. And so I think those statements were about that effort. Now, the Taliban, the Erdogan government, Erdogan himself and his party has a special relationship with Islamists of all stripes. From Erdogan's point of view, and from the point of view of many Islamists around the world, whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood in the Arab world, you know, its various flavors in North Africa and the Middle East, to, you know, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Erdogan represents, you know, the success of Sunni Islamism. So while they won't focus on the fact that he's not as ideological as they are, he's more realpolitik, but they see his project, his coming to power and staying in power as something to emulate, something to actually take lessons from, if you will. And so that's what Erdogan knows that. Erdogan is playing on that. And he's hoping that that's something that will attract the Taliban. Right now, the Taliban are just an insurgent movement. How do you go from being a deeply, deeply ideological, you know, insurgent movement that's sort of somewhere between Salafism, jihadism, and Deobandi Islam, which is a very particular flavor that is very different from Turkey's religious evolution and Turkish Islamism. So they need to be, the Taliban want to be able to now say, okay, how did you make it and how can we make it? How can we now govern? We've been an ideological movement, so maybe there's something these guys can do it for us. There's also, there's a lot of trust between the Taliban and the Qatari leadership. And they rely on the Qataris for a lot of things, money, and until now, sanctuary, diplomatic support. And they know that the Turks and the Qataris are very tight. And so I think they will trust Erdogan. The other thing is that from the Taliban point of view, the more the merrier is the principle. Because right now, what they want is as many countries that will come and recognize them. Maybe recognition will come down the road, but at least they'll do business. At a time when they have a dilemma. The dilemma is they really need money from the West. And the money, the real money for them to be able to stabilize the situation, not, go get by day to day, but really stabilize the situation can only come from the West. But they know that the West isn't about to recognize them. And in order to do business with the West, they have to change. And they realize that they can't change. At least the leadership realizes that we can't turn into something that is acceptable for Western powers. So what do you do in the meantime? Well, you go to the Chinese, and the Chinese, there's the Uyghur issue and whatnot. And there are other apprehensions that the Chinese have with regards to the security of their BRI project. And so that's not exactly a low-hanging fruit. You also, can't just rely on Pakistan, which is the closest ally. You have relations with the Iranians, but then the Iranians are sanctioned as well. And so what can they get you? Russia is, far away, but okay, through the Central Asian states, there is a relationship. So Turkey represents something unique. A, they don't have a problem with our ideology, okay? B, they're fellow Muslims anyway, and they're allies of one of our allies, the Qataris, and they have a good relationship with the Pakistanis. Pakistan doesn't really have, is is politically, from a political economic point of view, at its weakest. And so they can only give you so much. Okay, they're also going out to the IMF, and they need to do certain things and play ball with the West in order to, get what they need from international financial institutions. So Turkey comes in and is really good. And they also know that the Saudis and the UAE, if for no other reason, will not want to be close to us, it's going to be because we have a special relationship with the Qataris. So through the process of elimination, they don't have much of a choice, the Taliban.
And what about the other side of the negotiations, the one represented by figures like Hekmatyar, who again, he spoke quite positively about Turkey, and to my knowledge, he's had some relationship with the country over the years.
Yes, that's an angle that needs a bit of unpacking as well. So Hekmatyar is an old Islamist who, back in his heyday was the war against the Soviets. He was the blue-eyed boy of, the Saudis and the Pakistanis and even the Americans, because he apparently was positioned as having the most powerful militia in the country, which wasn't exactly true, but that's what he was close to the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis posited him in front of the Americans, and so he's an old Islamist, and he's also from the same sort of stream of Islamist thought that is the AKP. AKP being far, far more advanced, but still, it's part of the wider Muslim Brotherhood, worldview. So that really allowed Erdogan and Hekmatyar to maintain relations with Turkey. But the other thing is, he's not the only one, and his group is no longer what it used to be. The same could be said of Ahmad Shah Massoud's group. The only difference, they're also of Muslim Brotherhood style group. The only difference between them and Hekmatyar is ethnically Pashtun. His group is ethnically Pashtun majority, and Ahmad Shah Massoud's group, the Jamiat Islami, is Tajik dominated. So there is a relationship there as well, and that relationship is through another warlord, Ata Nur, who was the governor of Balkh province, and he recently fled with Dostum. And the reports say he ended up in Turkey as well. So Ata is also from Jamiat Islami, and there's affinity there as well. Obviously, there's no ethnic affinity because the Uzbeks are a Turkic people, so it's a Turkic thing with Dostum. But with Nur, it's still, this guy needs a place to survive and hang out until he can find his space in a Talibanized Afghanistan and stage a comeback. And B, he's also part of that wider Muslim Brotherhood type thinking. And it's always useful to have many characters, in your toolkit, if you will. So just don't rely on and one of the things that the Turks are hoping is that they will use all these relationships that aren't as robust. So for example, Turkey's relationship with the Taliban and their opponents is not as robust or nowhere near as robust as that of the Iranians. Okay, so, but they still have these relationships and they want to be able to build upon that. So I think that all of these factors, these guys need Turkey, Turkey needs them. Sounds like a handshake in the making.
Mm-hmm. There's one last question I have, and it's about another player that's involved in the international picture here, and particularly in Turkey's calculations, and that's the European Union. Because right after Kabul fell to the Taliban, the immediate statements coming out of European leaders, whether it was Emmanuel Macron or others across the bloc, was that they were focused on migration flows coming out of Afghanistan, the potential for more refugees to begin flooding into Europe in the same way that Syrians did in 2015. And of course, by design, Turkey is going to be important in that. But as you mentioned, Turkey is probably unlikely to want to host any more Afghans. We see the ratings in which they measure the anti-refugee sentiment inside of Turkey. They're hosting 4 million Syrians on top of, I believe, over 100,000 Afghans already. And then we saw how this boiled over a couple of weeks ago in Altındağ, right outside of Ankara. So there's a lot of frustration there, and it's a major political liability for President Erdogan to take in more refugees. And right before we had this conversation, another report came out saying that Turkey was not interested in any cooperation with the European Union if it's based around out of housing more refugees or just giving money for that purpose. So on that note, I want to ask you, do you think that Turkey's involvement in Afghanistan also opens the door to some further cooperation on a level with the European Union, whether it's about curbing the migration flows in places like Iran, or even trying to find support for refugees in other neighboring countries, like some of the European heads of states are saying? What do you think?
So, look, the Turkish economy isn't doing well. Okay, and the Turkish government does not want to take on more refugees, as I mentioned earlier. And I don't think that the way that the Syrian refugees, because there was a direct border, Turkey's entire southern flank is largely the border with Syria. So it was natural for 3 million people to come over into Turkey. That's not the same case here, and I think that there's a lot of standoff, geospatial standoff between Turkey and Afghanistan. But what is happening with the Europeans is that, and this has to do not with the Afghan refugees. This is something that has been going on between Ankara and Brussels in the context of the Syrian refugees, where from time to time Erdogan has sort of opened the tap of refugees going in order to extract the things that he wants from the Europeans. And mostly it's been about, if we're going to house these, then the world should pay us for it, and the world should, and we're a NATO member state. Most of the European countries are part of NATO. So they need to pony up. They need to, cough up the money. And that's been sort of the strategy of the Turks. Now, I don't see there being an actual pressure on the Turks in terms of more refugees, but I do see the Turks basically saying to the Europeans, playing on the European vulnerability of more refugees coming in and saying, we can take care of this problem for you if you just paid more money. And so I think that that's the calculus here. And again, going back to the thing that there's a fact, which is that the Turkish economy isn't doing well. And if Erdogan, at the end of the day, you look at all these ventures from Libya to the Eastern Med to the Levant to the South Caucasus and now Southwest Asia, all of this costs money. So if, expanding the sphere of influence requires a lot of money. So if the Turks don't have it, they have to find it somewhere. And for the Turks to be useful to the Afghans, they need to be able to say, we can get this for you. And one of the things that I didn't mention, and I should have, is that the Turks have something that and in a far greater way than the Qataris could offer this to the Taliban. One of the things that has sort of binded the Taliban with the Qataris is that they knew that their Qatari hosts were the connection to the United States. And now the United States has withdrawn, and the United States is basically saying, we're done here. But the Europeans are always about more, they're looking at things from a humanitarian point of view. That's sort of their worldview. And the Turks will tell the Taliban, or at least signal to the Taliban, that we can get you things from Europe. we can make your case in front of Europe. And so play ball with us. So I think that they're leveraging their connection to Europe, however, good or bad it is, in order to be able to get the Taliban to rely on them.
So do you think, so if I'm understanding this correctly, it would be fair to say that Turkey, in a sense, is playing both off of the Taliban's desire for, say, recognition or, say, financial assistance, and then the Europeans are playing off them for whether it's concessions or also like financing towards them. They're playing the two sides off against each other, as they've done in a number of other cases with different relationships. Is that a fair characterization?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're Turkey and you just don't have the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal, the physical capacity to deal with this on your own, and you have all these connections that other allies of the Taliban do not, then you will leverage them, and so it wouldn't be a surprise. I mean, this is, after all, the basic sort of ingredient of geopolitical relations.
Okay. Well, Kamran, we've reached the end of the recording now, so I'd really like to thank you for taking the time to join me to talk about this topic. It was really insightful for me, and I'm absolutely sure it will be for our listeners as well. So I really look forward to getting another chance to talk to you properly sometime soon, depending on how things take shape in Afghanistan.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
My name is Nicholas Morgan, and this is Turkey Abroad.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here, for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.